It's 2 days until the Paper 3 GCSE history exam, so like I did for Paper 2, I'm going to do an overview of what you need to do to answer all the questions in the exam. A little bit of exam advice. I feel like I've probably given the exam advice in the last video, but here it is. So, as before, I have these flashcards, which I made last year, to help me know how to answer the questions, what's going on with them, that kind of thing. So the first thing, got a nice little paper 3. Paper 3 is a green paper apparently, according to my colour scheme last year. So it's your modern depth study. There are 3 options for it. Weimar and Nazi Germany is the most popular one. You'll know what your other option is. I can't think what they are off the top of my head. Got a feeling one might be like Russia and China or something. I might be entirely wrong. Don't quote me on that. But yeah. So Weimar and Nazi Germany, that's everything you need to know about it, and you can see the design on the other side through it. The questions on paper 3 will be, for your first question will be a source inference question, which will be 4 marks, and then you have an explain question, because they like those, which will be 12 marks, which is kind of nice because that way you can just remember how to answer that type of question and it comes up again and again. And then you've got question 3, which is a source usefulness question, so that's 8 marks. Again, that one's come up before on paper 1, I think. And question 4 is difference in interpretation, so that's something that's exclusive to this paper, similar with the source inference. That's 4 marks. And then reasons for differing interpretations, which is also 4 marks. And then you have a sort of how far do you agree question, but it's how far do you agree with interpretations. So it's a little bit of a different one, and that one's 20 marks. And I believe 4 of those 20 marks are spag? I might be wrong. We can go and check this actually. Oh, well, we'll check it when we get there because I've got a paper open, as you can see. Actually, we may as well have the paper open now. But let's go and see. Which one is it? Preview. Yeah. So spag is 4 marks, and then the rest of it will be 16. But, yeah. So it's sort of 20 marks, but technically 16. You just have to write well to get those extra 4 marks. So if you don't know anything about that question, but you write it nicely, then that's 4 marks at least. That's the plus side of having spag. Yeah, so I guess we should go back to the beginning. Got all this stuff at the start. 1 hour 20. I think you've got an extra 15 minutes this year, because this is last year's paper again. So it opens up with a source. This one's talking about the Olympics. Source inference question is reasonably simple. Essentially, you're making, it's got it out here for you, so it's like point a little bit of evidence about it, and then you do the same thing again. Like, evidence? Quote, even. You know what I mean. It's like, what can you infer from this source about, where's the question gone? About the Berlin Olympic Games, what can you infer from this source? And then you'd be like, let's find a good inference. So an inference is like, rather than something that's directly said in the source, it's something you can take from what's directly said in the source. So something you could infer here would be perhaps that the Olympic Games successfully helped spread the Nazi message, helped the Nazi party, something like that. So like, what I can infer, the Olympic Games provided a boost for the Nazi party, or successfully helped helped create support for the Nazi party. Details in the source that tell me this. You could take, for instance, there's a quote somewhere here. Where did I see it? The Nazis had succeeded in their propaganda. So this little bit here, and you're just taking a quote from the source essentially, and then you do the same again for a second inference and then quote. So that one's pretty simple, should be reasonably easy marks. Again, the thing that's going to be tough there is coming up with ideas for inferences under pressure. Because these questions that should be really simple, the 4-mark ones, are often some of the most difficult ones when you're trying to do them under pressure. Because you're there thinking, is that an inference? Is it not? I don't know. Help me. Then you've got an explain question, which I do actually have a full video on if you haven't seen it already. It's explain, it will be 3 peel paragraphs, so you have a peel paragraph on rearmament even, a peel paragraph on autobahns, and then a third peel paragraph on information of your own. You can choose to not use these 2 points if you wish to, but it makes your life easier if you do use the ones they suggest. And then question 3, we scroll on down, will be a source usefulness question. So at the bottom of this there's a source booklet. So if I go down here, oh, that's the interpretations. So there should be a picture here. For some reason it hasn't loaded up, but it was basically like some Freikorps, not soldiers. I mean, in a way they're soldiers. It says Freikorps or soldiers. Some of them stood in front of a tank, if I remember correctly. Yeah, source usefulness. You want to talk about nature, origin, that kind of thing. So like, the nature of this source is, or this source is, and then talk about that. Make sure you either reference the picture in the case of this first one, or take a quote from it. Evaluate how useful that picture, the thing from the picture or the quote is. Evaluate how it's limited. Use your own knowledge. The great sentence, from my own knowledge, will go a long way for you to make sure the examiner realises that you're using your own knowledge. Talk about the purpose of the source. And also you need to make a judgment on how useful you think the source is. So that should, you do 1 paragraph like that for each source. And then, actually I have just here some ones I did last year. Yeah, you don't need a conclusion. I was wrong in that other video. I think that was the first one that no one saw. It's up on Facebook. So yeah, also you don't need a conclusion. Also you don't need a conclusion, so long as you say, I think source A is so and so helpful, I think source B is so and so not helpful, or however you want to put it. Right. Also, yeah, down here you have your interpretations as well. So bear that in mind, they're in a separate booklet. But it means you can have the booklet open whilst you've got the question paper open. Now, if I can find, that's the question we were just on. There we go. This is a nice simple one, 4 marks. The difference in interpretations. So I just had a bit of confusion because these 2 flashcards, I've got the back is the wrong way round, which was a bit dumb of me. I survived last year, so I clearly must have remembered it at the time that I'd done that wrong. So what you want to do here with this question, the main difference, you want to state what a main difference between the 2 interpretations is, so like an overall view of what's being said in the first interpretation, and then you back it up with some information from that interpretation, so like a quote from it, and then say how the second one is different to the first one, so like the overall view of the state the overall view of the second interpretation, and then say this is different to the first interpretation because, like, briefly, it's not anything that you need to get too in depth or at all in depth with, and then you put like a quote to back up how that's different, or yeah, basically just put a quote. And then going to suggest one reason why interpretations 1 and 2 give different views about the challenges facing the Weimar Republic in the years 1919 to 23. So what you want to do here is you want to describe what details are said in the first source. So remember the difference between sources and interpretations. Don't muddle them up. So describe in detail what's said in the first source, and then connect the details in the first source to the interpretation, which gives more weight. Weight being relies more heavily on that source. There'll be one interpretation that relies on one source more, and there'll be one interpretation that relies on the other source more. And so you need to work out which one that is, and then you can connect what's said in that first interpretation to what's the details in the source that it gives more weight to, and you're the reason for the difference is because they give weight to different sources. Actually, yeah, there's an opening line here I've got as well. The interpretation may differ because the historians have given weight to different sources, and then you go into what I just said. So this last question here is the interpretations. How far do you agree with interpretations question? This one. 16 marks, 4 marks spag, as I mentioned earlier. It's the one I'm least confident giving advice on, because last year Weimar Nazi Germany was the last topic that we did, and so we did it during the spring term. And so this question was introduced to me quite late, so it was still half term where I nailed it, or got down how to do it. But I still practice questions. I think I was getting 14 marks out of 16, not including spag, which I like to think spag I got 4 out of 4, but there have been occasions where I've got 3. Can't tell you what I got in the exact marks on this question I got in the actual exam because I don't remember. Well, yeah, I have a structure here that should work for you, but if you think you know better on this question, there's a good chance that you do know better, so take your advice over mine. So the way I've done this is got 2 reg paragraphs, which is reference, evidence, judgment. So take interpretation 1 and go reference what's said in the interpretation, what it's talking about. And then use as some evidence, some of your own knowledge, some spend, statistics, places, events, names, dates, to back up evidence. To back up the what is said in the interpretation. So your quote or reference. And then make a judgment on how, whether you agree with that interpretation because of your own knowledge that you contributed. And then do that with the second interpretation as well. So you've got 2 reg paragraphs. And then you've got a compare paragraph, which is kind of hard to explain. What I've written here is reference both interpretations, giving brief judgment with acknowledgement to their weaknesses. So I feel like it would be easier if I just read you a compare paragraph. So this is from a question talking about reasons for the growth in Nazi support between 1929 and 1932. Interpretation 1 was talking about saying it was because Hitler's charisma, whereas interpretation 2 was, or is it the other way around? Yeah, I think, and then interpretation 2 was saying that the Great Depression was the reason for it. So what I've written here is interpretation 1, however, does not explain why the Nazis gained such rapid growth in support in the period 1929 to 32, as Hitler was also leader of the Nazi Party prior to this period. For instance, Hitler led the Nazi Party in the 1923 Munich Putsch, but did not receive enough support for it to be successful. The Great Depression, however, began in 1929, at the start of this period of growth, thus making it seem a likely factor. Moreover, I know that the NSDAP were popular with workers who suffered badly in the Great Depression, thus may turn to the radical views of the party for a last hope. This therefore strengthens the argument put forward in interpretation 1 to be I believe, stronger than interpretation 2. And then I've got a conclusion. So conclusion is basically me summarising those more briefly. So I've got, whilst I believe both interpretations point to strong contributory factors toward the growth of the Nazi Party in the period 1929 to 32, interpretation 2 is unable to give reason as per why the Nazis received a surge in growth in the given period. Interpretation 1, however, is able to explain this better as the Wall Street crash occurred in 1929. Consequently, I agree with interpretation 1 more than interpretation 2. So the main thing with the conclusion is it's summarising the argument again, and it said, this is the one that I agree with more than the other interpretation. That's basically your questions done. Yeah. One quick thing I want to say is going to be doing a live stream Monday night, 5 p.m. See you there. I'm going to cover the whole of Weimar and Nazi Germany, and if you've got any questions you want to ask them. Yeah, I'll be there answering your questions. If you saw the one that we did Wednesday night, it was lots of fun. Had Byron there who was moderating comments for me and in the chat. Yeah, should be good. Wesab ye harla.